Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host for Tall Tales with Taco. Welcome aboard. My name is Mitch Bell. I am a retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, and everyone calls me Taco. So there you go. Base it off the last name or something else. Who knows? But it's always fun. Listen, this is a very emotional segment tonight in terms of powerful feelings. I've seen this presented at Skyball. And that was the first time that I actually got to meet Stephanie Case and her husband Rick and hear the incredible story of what she did to go through and find her father who passed in Vietnam. See, her dad was a Navy doc and he became a flight medic. She never knew her dad. So this is just a neat story that you guys, I think you will enjoy and look forward to spending about an hour with Stephanie, and I'd like to bring her on. A big round of applause for Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You are the
Hello.
how's it going out there?
It's gone well, very well.
Well, my mom said to make sure that I point out that you are an author and this is your book and everybody should be able to see that. A Corpsman's Legacy. How
That's
long did
me.
it how long did it take you to write this?
The first book took about 8.5 years. I would just write, and then something else would happen in my life, and it would kind of change the tone of the book or add a different aspect to the book. And so I just kept changing it, and then finally, when I got my dad's wings, that kind of felt like the good place to stop.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Let's talk about this. You were adopted and you had no idea. So how did all of this come about?
So yeah, I was adopted at birth, and I always knew that I was adopted. My parents didn't make any secret of that, and so I never really thought I would search for my family because I had a family. But then when I was 26, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and the doctor said it would really help if you could get your medical history, and so that's kind of what prompted this whole journey to start.
And how did you go about doing that? I mean, are you friends with any genealogist? I know my mom is a genealogist. Would love to hear that. Oh, you contacted somebody in the DAR or some ancestry.com, perhaps.
Not back then. So back in 96, there wasn't much around. And so my adoptive mom actually kind of remembered my birth mom's name, or she thought she might. She doesn't even remember where she heard it. It was just kind of in passing. And so my adoptive dad, he kind of dug around. He knew a lot of people. I lived in Oregon at the time, Portland, Oregon. And we found out that there was a monthly meeting of kids who were adopted. And
Mhm.
so we went to that meeting, and there was a lady there that they called the sleuth. And she would take whatever information you would have, and she would try to find your parents for you. Because, of course, back then it was a closed adoption. And so I gave her my birth date, the hospital I was born, and maybe my mom's name. And she would just kind of looked at me like, "You're a little bit crazy if you think I can work with that little information." And I said, "That's all we have." And then she called me in 12 hours and she had found my mom, my birth mom.
Were you born in Oregon? Was your mom still living in Oregon?
She was. Yeah, we lived maybe 25 miles away from each other.
That's amazing. And do you think you ever ran across her or anything like that? Do you
So I
recall?
don't think I did, but it was really funny. My adoptive dad had gotten remarried, and my stepbrother would come home sometimes, and he'd be like, "I waved at you on the street. Why didn't you wave back?" And I would be like, "I wasn't in that area." And we found out later he was most likely seeing my half sister, since we looked
Oh,
a lot
no
alike.
way.
Yeah.
You guys look a lot alike?
Mhm.
Oh, that's
Mhm.
amazing. So
Yep.
now you get up with your mom
Mhm.
and your mom tells you, well, your dad died in Vietnam. So now this journey takes you to a different place, right? So you're going down a different avenue, which record-wise, I would think would be just incredibly hard. How
Absolutely.
did you do this? We'll talk about your dad, Gary, and what happened over there.
So she had all she really had on him was his obituary. So I kind of like to say, in like one fell swoop, I gained a dad and lost a dad all at once. I saw his picture, and even though I look like my mom and my sister, I look exactly like my dad. I mean, like freakily so, like my dad. And so it had a little bit of information in there, but at the beginning, I was real cognizant of, would I be opening up a door that the family would have, pain from? Because my
Right.
mom told me what happened was she got pregnant and they weren't dating anymore. And then he went to Vietnam. And so he didn't know that I existed. He
Oh,
was
wow.
killed 2.5 months before I was born. And she
Oh.
was going to meet him on an R&R and tell him, but he didn't get to take the R&R. So I really had to do a lot of thinking about whether I wanted to find his family and whether it would just bring more pain or happiness.
Mhm.
And I ended up going to my dad's grave on Veterans Day. I thought, well, I'm going to go up and visit his grave,
And he's
and
buried up there in
he's buried in
Oregon?
Oregon.
Okay.
And I saw this group of guys having a little ceremony, and I didn't really understand it. And I kind of like went up next to them, and it was veterans, and they were having a little Veterans Day ceremony. And of course, as you know, on Veterans Day, the living go, you know, have memorials at their grave sites or at cemeteries, etc.
Right.
And something about that just struck me, and I thought, you know what, I need to find out what happened to my dad, because all I knew was he was in a helicopter crash. And
Oh, so these
so
guys weren't there for your dad, they were for somebody else?
they were just there
Ah.
doing like a normal ceremony. And I just thought, I don't know. There was something about the bond that you could tell between all of them. And it
Right.
just, something just nudged me to go, and that it was time to start this journey. And so I went home, and I really didn't know how.
Mhm.
And it was kind of when the internet was just starting out, and my work had it. No one had laptops at home. You didn't have internet. And so I'd asked my boss, hey, hey, on my off hours, do you mind if I search? And he said, go for it. And so
Mhm.
I put in helicopters, corpsmen, and Vietnam. And back then there weren't a whole lot of results, but I got the Vietnam Helicopters Pilot Association group.
Oh.
And I saw this thing called webmaster. I didn't even know what a webmaster was at that time. I mean, things have changed so much since
What
then.
year was this? This is in 90.
96,
Yeah, 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 yeah. I
1996.
mean, we had
Yeah,
Happy Mail back then.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I went on and I wrote the webmaster, and shockingly, I didn't even expect an answer. And he wrote me back in a few hours and said, well, I was an Army pilot, but let me see what I can do. And that just started my main journey, where these strangers just came out of the woodwork to help me. And that's
Right.
what I've said all along. Like, my journey is only possible because of the kindness of strangers.
Well, all these guys have turned into like uncles now, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, then did you go first and track down your grandfather and that side of the family, your dad's side of the family?
I did. So what happened was so they put a blog, not even a blog back then, it was like a post on the Vietnam Helicopters Pilots Association website. Air Force pilot who lived in DC saw the post that I was looking for information and went down and put something up on the Vietnam wall in Washington D.C. at the memorial.
Oh,
And so
wow.
he had seen something, and so then another veteran went down to the archives
Uh-huh.
and dug up my dad's records, and
Wow.
actually ended up mailing a copy to the Pilots Association and to myself. And I got that information on February 6th, which was the day before the anniversary of my dad's death. He was killed on February 7th. And so, as you said, these guys became my uncle, and one guy was Uncle Polecat. And
Uh-huh.
he called me up, and he had, again, back when this was so new and not many people had it, he had a database of every telephone number in the United States. He had one of those CDs that you got back then.
Wait a minute,
And
Polecat, what was his real name?
Jim Scheckler,
Okay. All right, never
he's
mind.
he's pretty active in a lot of stuff, but okay.
We had a Marine C-130 guy named Polecat.
Okay,
So,
nope, he was a
and I thought
Huey.
he was a transition guy. All
No,
right, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
that's okay. So he had a CD, and he said, I can get all the names of your dad's dad. His name was
Uh,
Delbert Newton. And he said, I can get all the names and phone numbers, and you need to start calling them tomorrow, because you know what tomorrow is. And I just thought, are you kidding me? Okay. And, here, this Uncle Polecat, he'd done so much for me. There was no way I could tell him no. And so I went into work the next day, and I grabbed my best friend there and dragged her into an empty office. And I said, we're going to make telephone calls. I'm trying to find my grandpa. And so I picked up the phone. I said, I'll start in Oregon. So, I'm not calling long distance, because he had them all over the United States. Just picked up the phone, started dialing. She grabbed the phone and she said, hung it up. She goes, what are you going to say to this person? And I said,
Yeah.
Shelly, I said, look at this list. I literally have thousands of names. By the time I figure out the right person, I'll figure out what I'm going to say.
Right.
She's like, okay. So I dialed the first number and I said, may I speak with Delbert? And he said, this is he. And I knew it was, because I was calling a Delbert. And I said, well, I'm looking for the Delbert that was, the father of Gary Young, killed in Vietnam. And he said, well, yes, that's me.
Very
And
first shot.
Very
One
first shot.
Wow.
And I literally held the phone receiver out, looked at it, tried to hand it off to Shelly. I was like, oh, I don't know what to say. And so, the poor guy's sitting on the phone, like, waiting. And I said, well, then I guess I'm your granddaughter. And he had no idea I even existed. The sweetest man alive, too. He was like, well, isn't that an interesting thing? And so that was because, you need to talk to your Uncle Steve. He would know more about this. And I talked to my Uncle Steve that night, and they went and saw both of them the next day. And
on the anniversary.
On the anniversary.
Oh, that's terrific. Oh, my
Mhm.
God.
Yeah.
Man, oh, man. So now you've made connection with your Uncle Steve, with your grandfather, and they start pulling out mementos, and you start seeing things about your dad, right?
Exactly. They have one box that they've kind of just put away. Gary's death really hit them hard. There was 3 boys in the family. They lost Gary, and then their oldest brother, Ron, he was killed in 1981. So they just had a lot of tragedy in their lives. My grandmother had passed away when my dad was in boot camp. So they were gracious enough to give me this box of what they had. And I had some letters. I had a few photographs. For me, the most precious thing was his dog tag. And
Oh, wow.
I just took a hold of that and couldn't let go of that. They even had some reel-to-reel tapes, and Grandpa Dell eventually got those into a cassette tape so I could listen to that. So I had a few things, but there was not anything that said really what happened. There was the telegrams, but it just ignited a fire in me, and I just thought, what happened? And so I asked them, what happened? And they said, we don't know. All they knew what was in the obituary. It's not like nowadays where you can download information off of the internet and talk to a lot of people. They just said, we just didn't know. And for the next few weeks, as I talked to them, it just really struck me that, well, if they don't know, then there's all these families that don't know. And how do I find this? And so I went back to the internet and came across a few associations, and I just went old school. I started sending out the few emails that I could find, but I also sent out just tons and tons of snail mail letters. And I sent it to probably a ton of people who had no knowledge whatsoever of my dad. But what completely shocked me the most is like 95% of these guys answered.
That is so awesome.
It was unbelievable. That alone right there could have been the best journey ever. Just finding these people that every letter was the same. Hey, I don't know your dad, but if he was a corpsman, he was a great guy. If he volunteered to fly on medevacs, he was great. So I learned a lot just from these people who didn't think they were teaching me anything. And they were teaching me that, here's your Marines, and Marines don't have doctors, so they have the Navy Corpsmen, and that the Navy Corpsmen, they're Marines. Just on and on. And it was about another year and a half before I actually got any information on my dad.
Well, then how did you get that? Somebody came forward and said, oh, I was in the squadron with your dad? Or
yes. So
who was that? Who was that person?
It was another corpsman. And so what had happened was, there was kind of a two pronged way that I found this out. There was the corpsman side and then the Marine Corps side. So I did find someone who had a listing of all the deaths on that day, all of the men that were killed in action. And he looked at it, and there was 2 helicopter crashes that day. And he looked at this list and said, okay, there's 2 corpsmen. They never put 2 corpsmen on the same helicopter. So your dad must have been with HMM 268. And I thought, okay, he was with 268. So while I was trying to find out more information about 268, I get an email from a corpsman who says, "I served with your dad in Mag 16, and
Oh, wow.
I knew him for 3 days, and I've always remembered him." And I think that's what struck me the most is these people who knew him for so few days. He must have made such an impression.
Right.
So he
Right.
had been in Da Nang since September of 1968, and he
Mhm.
was at Mag 11, which was a sick bay dispensary at Da Nang. But what he wanted to do was to fly Casevacs
Right.
and Medevacs. And so he kept applying for that and applying for that. In the last week of January, he was transferred to Mag 16. And so he went up flying, and he was killed on his first day flying.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So the people that knew him, he was only around for a few days.
Right.
And then I finally found a pilot from HMM 268 that was in Vietnam on that time. And so I called him up on the phone, and I was explaining to him that I think, my dad was in the helicopter. And he said, "Did your dad crash in land or water?" And I knew from his casualty report that it was on land. And
Right.
he said, "Your dad wasn't with 268 because I was out flying chase on that mission, and they went into a lake." He said, "Your dad was with 364, the Purple Foxes."
Oh, wow.
And that's kind of when the doors started opening.
Mhm.
And I stumbled across this website called Papa Smoke.
Mhm.
And
Mhm. I know that.
Papa Smoke.
Yeah.
And so that's for all military Marines and corpsmen that served in helicopters in combat.
Right.
And they had just put up their website not too long before that, and they had a directory. And it was full of men and their emails. And so I
Oh,
went to the HMN 364 Purple Fox's site, and I literally started emailing every single person. That's the Purple Fox.
yeah. I got that. I got that in Iraq.
hmm So, and they responded like you can't even imagine. I mean, if the Marines from beforehand responded amazingly, the Purple
Right.
Foxes, they just came out of the woodwork. And the material came in so fast I couldn't keep up with it. And then I found the commanding officer from the
Uh-huh.
day that my dad died, Lieutenant Colonel Gene Brady.
Uh-huh.
And the men who served under him, they called them the Brady Bunch because they loved him so. He was so beloved. And once he said, "We will find out what happened," I mean, all the information I could ever want came in.
Wow. So he was digging. He probably got back to the squadron, started digging through the archives at the
hmm
squadron because you have to
And
get it
just people,
history and.
actually, he just went to people and said, "Hey, were you flying this day?" And
Oh.
what really happened was the biggest thing was the pilot on my dad's helicopter was the name Captain Ernie Bartolina, and
Uh-huh.
everyone knew him. So I quickly learned that no one's going to remember my dad's name right off the bat because, of course, they all called him Doc. No one's
Right.
going to remember Gary Young. So I started sending out more information that said, you know, Ernie Bartolina was the pilot, and that's what people really came forward for because they remembered Ernie Bartolina. He'd been there for 12 months, so he was getting ready to go home.
Right before he left. And you had
hmm
there were 2 docs on there because he was doing training, like observation
Correct.
flights or something. Sure.
Correct. Yeah. So there's
That
one
makes
time when
sense.
you get the old doc and the new doc. And so the old doc comes and they fly for one day with the new doc. And so the other corpsman was Rip Terrell, and it was his last day flying.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And he was going to re up. Back then in Vietnam, they had a program where if you re upped, then they would give you 30 days and you could go anywhere in Europe. And so he was going to go take that trip and then come back. And so he was killed his last
Man.
day.
Oh,
hmm
God, that's horrible. So
Yeah.
were you able to find, the wingmen, the people that went in to rescue or not rescue, but recover and
Everything.
talk to them?
Yeah, the one of the big finds was the crew chief on the chase bird.
Uh-huh.
So because of the angle, he's the only one that saw my dad's helicopter get hit. And so he got on the phone and told me everything. I found the recovery team that went in and got his
Right.
remains. And they went in amidst a firefight.
Right.
Um, I found the pilot, the co-pilot of the chase bird, of the recovery team. And then many years later, I found the corpsman on the ground that actually called in the medevac. And that was like finding a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things, again, like you said, those guys
Mhm.
up there,
Yeah.
it just came upon my plate. And of course, had felt so awful all these years. He thought he was calling in a bird to a safe zone, and it wasn't that case.
And he probably carried a lot of burden from that.
A lot, yes. And then the big find was many years or many months after I found out, I found the lone survivor of my dad's crash. So there
Oh, there
was
was?
one
I
survivor.
thought they all perished.
Nope. So
Oh,
there was 7 on board, and it was that same thing where it was the crew chief's first day flying, and so
right,
there was an extra man on board. So everyone
right.
thought, there'd be 4 Marines and 1 corpsman, and then it turned into 4 Marines and 2 corpsmen. Now it's 5 Marines. And what
Right.
happened is when the helicopter was shot down and they were falling to the ground, he fell out of the helicopter. So he wasn't in the helicopter.
When
And
it
so
crashed. Wow.
the wingman came in and picked him up and took him back to the hospital. And so records just kind of got lost.
Gotcha, gotcha. But they were able to rescue him. They got him out
He
before
did.
the NVA got him.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And so I tracked him down.
I
That
got a
poor man.
crazy question. Did they recover the aircraft as well, or was it
They
destroyed?
didn't. It was destroyed. They burned it there. It went to a rice paddy and it was pretty much flattened out. So they had both hydraulic boosts shot out and it
Uh-huh.
actually did a nose flip.
Oh.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, you being a pilot would understand that. And so it was very rare, but that the crew chief, like he saw that and he couldn't believe it. And he was the only one who really saw that happen.
So they went in nose
Yeah,
because
and they
I've
did a
seen them.
full flip and then they crashed feet down. But one of the recovery team said it was like if you took a toilet paper roll and just smashed it.
Yeah. I
It was
saw a CH-46 come in at Cherry Point and it lost something in the back and it went full like that and they
hmm
crashed and then
Yeah.
went forward. Yeah, horrible, horrible. If it
Yeah,
had
this
been a little
rolled.
more, they would have gone backwards. Yeah.
Mhm.
So now you've got all these close friends now, all these new uncles that were alumni Purple Foxes, and the Purple
Mhm.
Foxes have a great reputation with a lineage and history there in Vietnam. So how do you get involved with the Purple Foxes down at in California at the base?
Yeah, so like you said, so they were the most decorated helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And they had some crazy pilots that did some crazy things. But their motto is, as you know, give a shit. And
Yeah.
that's because they really give a shit about the men they were going in to rescue. And so they are back in 96, 97, 98, they were still an active duty unit.
Hmm.
And what happened was I decided that, well, I didn't decide. My dad's main goal was he wanted to get his aircrew wings.
Uh-huh.
And I had talked to docs that told him, hey, he'd walk up and point to the wings on his chest and say, I want to earn those. How do I earn those?
Right.
And so for a long time, I said, well, he was killed on his first day flying his first mission. He didn't earn his wings. I had a few people say, hey, well, we can probably get some to you. And I said, no, no, no. I said, if he didn't earn them, I only want what he earned.
Right.
And so there was another corpsman, and he just kind of kept pushing at me. And he goes, well, have you ever seen any flight records from that day? And I said, no. I know the pilot's sister. I said I could ask her.
Hmm.
And he said, please do that. And I said, okay. So I asked her, and she sent me a pilot's logbook. And of course, it's just full of numbers. I'm like, I have no idea how to read this.
Right.
And so I sent it to one of the pilots that I knew. And he called me up and he said, Stephanie, he goes, your dad was killed on his 7th flight, or actually his 8th flight. They completed 7 flights. And in Vietnam at that time, if you completed 5 combat missions, you earned your wings.
Oh wow. So it wasn't his first flight.
Nope.
Yeah. Very cool.
We didn't know that until I got the logbook.
Well, how'd you know? How'd you know? Oh, did it have his name in the logbook?
It was Ernie's flight. So he, for the day of February 7th, they had the pilots. And so I knew he was on that helicopter.
Ah, okay, okay.
Yeah, because of Ernie. And, of course, then it said, 6 casualties, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So then it was like, how do you get them? And to back it up a little bit, when I had been first looking, my grandpa had said, hey, we never got his medals.
Right.
And so I went on a big quest
Really?
to try to get his medals. And because he'd gotten an air medal and the Purple Heart, and those were the
Mhm.
ones he wanted. And so I couldn't get those medals anywhere. I tried calling the archives, and I spent months and months. And I finally saw a TV special with Senator Max Cleland. I don't
Uh-huh.
know if you know who that is.
No.
So he was an Army in Vietnam, and
Mhm.
he was a crew chief, I think, or he was on helicopters, but he was walking out and he stepped on a landmine
Oh.
and he lost both legs. And on this, so this whole show is recounting everything he went through. And at the very end of the show, he said, and the people who saved me were some Navy corpsmen. And so I want every Navy corpsman and their family to know that they've got a senator behind them. And I thought, hey, all righty then. He's not my senator, but now he is. And so I
Right.
sent him a letter and I put all the details, because I dug up the flight records and I,
Mhm.
wanted to make it official. And so he sent me all of the medals. About 6 months later, I get a big package in the mail and I've got all my
That's
dad's medals, but I don't have
phenomenal.
his wings. And so I called the adjutant in his office and they said, we just don't know how to, there's just no record of how to do
Call the
that.
commandant of the Marine Corps. Come on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
CMC.
So I kind of was like, well, I don't know how. And so then there was a Papa Smoke reunion that year. And so I went to this reunion and people are asking me questions and how, what's your next goal? And I said, well, we've been trying to get the wings, but I don't know how.
Mhm.
And there's a pilot, Captain Rich Bianchino. And the next morning he comes up, he goes, Stephanie, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And his wife was like, yes, he did. Yes, he did.
I figured it out.
He did. He goes,
Got
you're going too high. You're going way up the ladder and they don't know how to do it. He says, because in Vietnam, literally you'd walk off the helicopter and the CO or someone would just throw a pair of wings at you and be like, there you go.
Right.
So he goes, there's an active duty unit and they're still active. He goes, that's who you need to contact. And so I was like, all right. So I got all my material again together and actually ended up being able to fax it to them. And I faxed it to them all excited. And that was September 10th, 2001.
Okay.
So
Wow.
next day, September 11th, my problem was no longer top of the priority
Right.
list.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So 9/11 happened. That was okay. They were busy doing other things. And then I guess it was probably 6 months later, Rich called up and said there was a change of command. Let's try again. Things are at least a little bit calmer. And so I sent off the fax again and I get an email that very day from the adjutant. And his name is Captain Marvel. That's literally his name, Captain Justin Marvel.
Right.
And
Right.
he said, this is now the CO's top priority. We will make this happen.
Oh God.
And so they went through all this paperwork and all sorts of stuff. And he finally, about 4 months later, sent me an email and he says, we've got the wings. How do you want them to be presented? And
Nice.
so, yeah,
Was your
so
grandfather still alive at the time?
he was. He
So
was.
were
And
you able to take him down there for that?
we didn't, he wasn't really up to flying then. And so what I ended up doing was we had another Papa Smoke reunion coming up in Pensacola.
Mhm.
And I thought, these are all the men that helped me get this far, and let's do it in front of them.
Mhm.
And so I asked the squadron commander, I said, can we do it at the dinner on Friday night? And he said, great. And so Colonel Gene Brady was going to be there. And so they were like, let's just have Colonel Brady award the wings to Stephanie.
Mhm.
And so I get to Pensacola, and all the purple foxes are kind of walking around with this real weird look on their face, like the cat ate the canary. And I'm like, it's just the wings. I mean, he's just going to hand me a set of wings. It's not a big deal. And so finally, the man who ran it all, Uncle Frank, he sat me down and he goes, all right, Stephanie. He goes, I wasn't going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you, the commandant heard about your wings. And I thought, okay. And he says, he was supposed to be here, but he got called into a meeting with President Bush. So he's sending down a lieutenant general, the deputy commandant of aviation.
And you have no idea who this guy is. Yeah, I
No.
mean, to you, your like rank is nebulous. You have no clue. Got it.
No, I didn't. It was really funny because I'd call my brother up and he'd be like, "Are you kidding me? You talked to a sergeant major, or you talked to a lieutenant colonel?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's just Gene Brady."
And your brother was in
So
the Marines too?
he was in the Marines, so he
That's
knew. He
funny.
was the only one that kind of understood all that. But then I called him up. I kind of got it when they said commandant. I was like, "Oh, the commandant
Yeah.
got involved," and so went and it turned into this great big ceremony because of course we had to have a head table at this dinner.
Yeah, yeah.
And he flew in on the commandant's jet just for the
Right.
ceremony, and they
Wow.
awarded the wings.
That is so phenomenal. Good on the
Mhm.
good on the commandant and his office to take care of you guys. That's awesome.
It was great. And one of the big things was, so in Vietnam, they had aircrew wings and
Hmm.
combat aircrew wings.
Right.
Corpsmen didn't rate combat aircrew wings because of the Geneva Convention, which is really kind of silly because that's all
Right.
they are, is in combat. And
Right.
so a lot of the commanding officers in Vietnam just gave them the combat aircrew wings. They didn't rate them, but they gave them to them.
Right.
And so I'm standing there getting presented, and they present me. The Foxes had done the the presentation really neat. They put it in a shadow box
Hmm.
with purple felt and then brown leather around it to represent a flight jacket. And they had a little
Nice.
plaque and then the wings. And I saw them and I was like, oh crap, these are combat aircrew wings. They screwed up. They forgot that my
Uh-huh.
dad was a corpsman.
Uh-huh.
The commandant changed it himself
No
to be
way.
combat aircrew wings.
Oh, that's phenomenal.
Yep. And then when our militaries, when they started going into Iraq and Afghanistan,
Yeah.
all those years later in 2002 and 3, I had corpsmen writing me, how do I get my wings turned into combat aircrew wings?
What did they retrograde that to everybody, to all corpsmen?
So eventually they did. And I've been told unofficially that it was because of my quest. That
Hey.
started it.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy, there's a
So,
lot of docs that owe you a beer because I know
yep, I'll take it.
the Navy guys. Yeah, I know the Navy guys love. I mean, the
Hmm.
Navy corpsmen at our base at Altacottum
Hmm.
would come up and they had to study this manual that was this thick of Marine Corps. I'm going. I think I learned that in boot camp. I don't know what you're talking. What are you even having to memorize? And they would give them this big test so they could get
Hmm.
their Navy Marine Corpsman award. It was this
Hmm.
big honking thing, and
Hmm.
yeah. So I know how much they pride that being part of the green side. Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
fantastic. So now you're friends with the commandant, or actually the general, and all these other guys,
Hmm.
and you have a relationship with the squadron.
Yes.
So now let's go into the squadron. You've got Captain Marvel,
Yep.
Justin Marvel,
Yep,
and
Justin Marvel. Even
and
when
you.
he made Lieutenant Colonel, I told him, I'm sorry, I'm always going to call you Captain Marvel. I just can't get over that. So, yes,
So
so they invited me down to the unit. And I mean, that was like, are you kidding me? This is
yeah.
awesome. And so they were in Iraq when they're on their first tour. And
Mhm,
the XO had sent me an email and said, why don't you visit? And I wrote back and I said, are you serious? Because I really am going to do that. That's awesome. And
mhm.
he was like, yeah, that's great. So I bought my plane ticket for after they were going to be back in the States. And then time's coming up, it's just a couple weeks out. And I'm like, okay, how do I get on base? I mean, it's wartime. And I remember when my brother had been in the Marines, like, I mean, there's all these levels of security. I can't just roll up to the base gate and say, come on in. So I'm emailing the XO and he's not answering back. And I'm like, I've got a plane ticket. Like, I don't know what to do.
Right.
And so I contacted Gene Brady, the former commanding officer from back in Vietnam. And he
Uh-huh.
said, I'm on it. I'm on it. Hung up the phone. And then he calls me back a little bit later and he says, okay, write down this phone number. I'm like, okay, sir. And he says, it's Captain Jennifer Harris. I said, okay, great. So I called Jennifer and got to know her. And she was Captain Marvel's best friend. And I knew that she had been instrumental in getting the wings.
Right.
And so she's like, okay, I'll get you on base. And sorry, the XO, they'd had a changeover and I didn't know. And it was just crazy. So she's like, we'll get you on base. So I actually flew down there. And
Yeah.
for me, after, years, 6-7 years of doing this, it was like going to a rock concert for me. Like,
Right.
I had a backstage pass,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you've run across Ernie Gooey Gomez. If you know Gooey Gomez,
No.
he was awarded a Navy Cross. Well, he was a Purple Fox and he lived in California and he's like, can I tag along? And I'm like, of course you can. And
Was he
so
Vietnam era or?
Vietnam, yep.
Cool.
And he was there at the same time as my dad. He didn't know him, of course, but he was there at the same time. And so we went and we got um, the XO came over and he was giving us a tour. And at one
Uh-huh.
point, so we're out on the flight line and, you have to kind of stay in the lines that are taped off if you're
Sure.
civilians. So Gooey, all of a sudden, he points and he says, walks over to one of the CH-46s and he starts fingering the patches of the bullet holes. And he said, this is the one I got shot down in. And the captain turns to me and he goes, ma'am, he's not supposed to be over there. And I was like, you get to go tell him. I'm not going to tell him.
Yeah, little Navy Cross
Navy Cross
recipient. Yeah,
recipient,
no, worry about
you
it.
go
Yeah.
tell him. So I got to go down, and then over the years, I mean, I got to visit the squadron multiple times, and then when they would get deployed, then I'd keep up with them that way, and
Well,
we just
you know
lost
what's
friends.
I'll tell you something funny. So when did you meet Sean Colleen?
So I knew Sean by email, but I didn't meet him until 2008.
Okay, until later.
So
And was
till
he?
later.
And when did he take over the squadron?
He
Was
was
that
in the squadron for 2007.
okay? Because I knew him back in 1994 when we spent a year on Okinawa together. And
Okay.
it was so funny seeing him, after all these years, full bird colonel. That
Mhm.
it's good to see good guys get promoted like that. But really neat. And I wasn't supposed to tell you this, but Sean was going to come on the show tonight and
Oh,
surprise you. But I got a text right before the show that he wasn't able to make it. He's flying, and he says to pass his best to you. But
oh, awesome. Thank you.
so
That would have been neat.
yeah,
He's a busy guy. He goes everywhere.
yeah, and he's an airline guy now, so he's out flying a lot.
Yep.
But so now you're accepted into the squadron. You become like the Purple Fox den mom. Sending care packages. What are
Mhm.
you doing for the squadron? Because we love being deployed. We love
Mhm.
people like you. There were many people like you, big huge supporters that took care of us when we were deployed.
Yeah, so it was an interesting coincidence. The Purple Foxes, we had just had a reunion, and some of the wives came back and they were like, you know what, we're kind of tired of the guys having all the fun. So we're going to start the Foxy Ladies. And it's going to be all of the wives from the Vietnam veterans. And so I kind of helped out behind the scenes, and we put up a website. And so we put up a website,
Foxy
I think,
ladies.
a week before the squadron deployed to Iraq for the first time.
Right.
And so, I mean, it was just coincidental. All of a sudden, we started getting all of these emails from wives, from mothers, from sisters, like, well, what's my son up to? What's my son? And we're like, oh, we weren't ready for the active duty. Like, we're for the veterans. So all of a sudden, it was a big scramble. And so
Wow. Yeah.
that's where I started using at least the few people that I knew and sending emails once they got up in Iraq with emails.
Yeah.
So we were sending things like, I know we sent over a lot of coffee before Starbucks got involved.
Hmm.
We sent over a lot of chocolate.
That
We were
melted.
that
Promptly
melted.
melted.
Exactly. Yep. We learned that lesson very fast. We were kind of like on that front line of, well, that's what you can't send over to Iraq. And so one of the biggest things that we ended up doing, not in terms of care packages, but I don't know if you've ever run across the news reporter Greg Jarrett. Do you
No.
know that name?
No.
He was with the radio station. Well, he started out in Portland, Oregon, so that's how I knew him. And then he was in KGO in San Francisco. And all of a sudden, on my radio station in Portland, I hear that he's over embedded with the Purple Foxes. And I thought, you've
Oh.
got to be kidding me. So I wrote to Top Bix, who was over there that I knew, and I said, you've got to put me in touch with Greg Jarrett. And so I actually got in touch with his producers down in San Francisco, and he would go interview pilots and crew chiefs, and then I'd find their families and I'd track them down. Because
Oh, that's so
again,
cool.
yeah, no one had, we weren't ready to use the internet at that time. People weren't
No, there was
using it for that.
yeah.
So I was, if they'd said, my mom's a school teacher in Loma Linda, I'd start Googling everything in Loma Linda
Uh-huh.
and try to find the people. And so that was a really big, neat thing from the first deployment.
That is
And
awesome.
then,
So then
yeah,
they came back and then they did like 3 or 4 deployments, right?
they
So
did,
then
I
they
think, 5 total. So then they went out the
Jeez.
second time and just kind of more the same thing. And then the third deployment was after I'd first published my first book.
Right.
And so I thought, hey, these guys, they love learning about the legacy of the Purple Foxes that they're
Mhm.
living up to. And so I had gotten the email of the new commanding officer, Mark
Mhm.
Schecker. And so I sent him a box of my books.
Mhm.
No, I'm sorry. I'm mixing up my tours. See, too many tours. The third tour is when Kid Clean was the commanding officer.
Right.
That's what it was. And so that was in 2007. So the big thing from that tour was they were going to be in Iraq on the first time for February 7th, which is the anniversary of my dad's crash.
Right.
And they had started a program they call Fly a Flag.
Mhm.
And so when someone requested that they fly a flag on a certain day, they'd put it in the helicopter and they'd fly it all around. And then they'd send a certificate that said this flown was flag in memory of or for this person. And so I thought, great. And so I wrote an email and to the master guns. I knew him. And I said, hey, can you guys fly one on February 7th for my dad and his crew? And he was like, oh, that absolutely. And he says, you don't even need to send us a flag. The corpsmen here, they've got a flag for you. And we're more than happy to do that. And so February 7th, and in 2007, I was driving to work, and I was like, kind of, bittersweet. It's like, it's always kind of a sad day, but now I've got something to look forward to. I've got a flag coming, and I'm driving into work, and I hear on the radio, the helicopter shot down. And then thought, oh boy, here we go again. And of course, back then, the internet was still, well, it was kind of new, but you didn't have the direct cell phones to people. And of course, as you know, if something happens in Iraq, all communications get shut down.
Right. We went River City is what they called it.
Okay, yes. And so I do get on the internet, and it's kind of like breaking it down. Okay, what branch was it first? Was it Army or Marine? I found out it's Marine Corps. What kind of helicopter comes next? CH-46, Cobra, and whatever. So I finally, about 7 hours later, see on the news it's a CH-46, and I thought there's only 2 units that are flying 46s. So I started calling in favors, which I don't like to do, but at that point I was like, what's going on? And a couple hours later, I get a text, and it just says it was the Foxes. And I just thought, are you kidding me? On the same day that they lose a helicopter, on the anniversary.
Yeah.
And so kind of went into full press mode of finding families again. The Vietnam guys were like, what can we do? And so they reached out to me, and I said, let me start tracking down the families. And, I knew Jen's family, and we just kind of started, or excuse me, I'm jumping ahead of myself. And so about an hour later, I get a phone call, and they said the names haven't been released, but Steph, it's Jen's helicopter. So Captain Jennifer Harris, who I was friends with, she was the pilot.
Right.
And
it was her last flight.
It was her last flight, and it was...
Gosh, so many eerie coincidences.
It's really eerie. So then all of a sudden we hear there's 5 Marines and 2 corpsmen on board. And I just thought, that never happens. Are you kidding me? And so then we start learning more. It was, as you said, Jen's last flight. It was the crew chief's first flight from the transitioning unit, Tommy Saba. It was his first flight. Just so many coincidences.
Yeah.
And so the minute I heard Jen's name, I was sitting there on the phone, and I just thought, my flag was on that helicopter. And I thought, doesn't matter. No, that's not important right now. And as you know, there's hundreds of flights a day sometimes, but I just knew it. And a couple of days later, I get an email from Master Guns, and he says, hey, Steph, can I give your flag to Sean Colleen? We'd like to do a memorial, and this would be a nice memorial. And I just thought, yeah, he's lying to me, but sure, go ahead. A couple days later, he writes back, and he says, you may not want to be friends with me anymore, but I can't lie to you. Your flag was on that helicopter.
That's tough.
And it wasn't supposed to be. But the XO forgot to take it, and I ran it out at the last second. So they were flying a flag for my dad and his crew, and then they were shot down, just like my dad and his crew.
Right. Well, gosh, you want to think that when they hit the pearly gates, guarded by Marines, of course, that your dad and everybody up there was there to greet Jennifer and her crew and bring them in.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, that is tough. So your legacy continues. I remember you put a bunch of stuff in there from after that incident, and it was it's just powerful. It's a powerful story, and a lot of things that shouldn't have meshed like that. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, the coincidence.
And once that happened, I knew that's when I knew I was going to write a second book. I didn't do it right away, but I knew that I had to at least get those guys' names in print.
Right.
Because then no one will forget them. And getting to know their families has been, like Jared Landecker, the co-pilot, his family says, it's a double-edged sword. You love all the people that you meet, but not why you met them. And that's been like my whole story.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've
So
met
now,
so many wonderful people, but
so so you go from there. Now you're still a big supporter of the squadron. You're taking care of them.
mhm.
How do you meet your husband, Rick?
So that's where I was jumping ahead of the story. So on their fourth tour is when I'd written my first book.
Uh-huh.
And so I sent over a box of books, and he had just become their sergeant major. He was a grunt for most of his career. For 27 years, he was a grunt.
Uh-huh.
And just circumstances happened where he could go to Iraq with this unit. And so he went with them and was kind of like a great, wing,
Swinging with the
wing
wing,
unit.
baby.
Swing with the wing. Yep. And so the CO kind of tossed one of my books on his desk and said, "Hey, you might like this."
Yeah.
And so he read it on he had a flight down to another city in Iraq, and he read it, and he went on base there and sent me an email. And so we became friends for a while, and then he and the CO invited me to their first Purple Fox ball when they got back. I'd never been to a birthday ball. And so that was exciting. And so I
Wow.
went down to that. And then Rick, the sergeant major, he was transferred back east.
Uh-huh.
And I had an opportunity to go to the GI Film Festival, if you've heard
Uh-huh.
of that.
Yeah.
There was that. And then Raz, who Raz very well, Raz Razgashek, he
Yeah.
came up with the first Warrior Night. Well, these events were like 2 weeks apart in DC, and I lived in Portland, and I
Mhm.
couldn't really afford to do all of that, and pay for a hotel for 2 weeks. And I had just happened to mention it to Rick, and he's like, "Well, I can put you up on base. Like, I can get you base, you know, at the BOQ."
Yeah.
And so he came, and then he ended up coming with me to the GI Film Festival, and
Uh-huh.
then down to the Warrior Night. And then I was like, okay, if he can hang with me through all that, then he's the guy to keep around.
Did you tell your brother, hey, I'm dating the sergeant major?
I did. And he's like, really? Because I don't think I ever talked to one except for when he yelled at me.
Yeah, I'm getting in trouble. What's
Mm-hmm.
funny is my wife is not a military wife. God love her.
Mm-hmm.
Teresa's a local Texas girl, lived 5 doors down. We got married, and she's pushing the stroller with the kids in the same street she grew up on, and she has no clue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just my husband's a Marine, and people go, "Well, what rank is he?" I don't know. Um, I
Yep.
think it's on my ID card, and she'd look or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Is he an officer? Did he go to college?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's a pilot. Oh, okay. So he's an officer,
Uh-huh.
that type thing.
Exactly.
You probably, you had to do that Marine 101, Marine 101.
I
Hey,
did.
hey, look, my husband even has a sign parked in front of the PX. Hey, this is great. The
Exactly.
commissary. I got reserved parking.
I have a parking spot at the commissary. That was the biggest thing. I was like, all right, we're getting married now. Then when we retired, I was like, oh, where am I going to
Oh,
park now?
oh, that is so funny.
But
That
yeah,
is so
back in
funny.
the beginning, it was exactly I didn't know rank from anything, and I went to a mess night that
Uh-huh.
had nothing to do with the Foxes. It was like First Marine Division, and a
Uh-huh.
corpsman had invited me to it, and I mean, I had no idea what was going on. And so these two guys started buying me beers, and I'm like, great. And so I went home, told my brother about it, and he's like, I was like, and I just kind of, they were Sergeant Major this and Sergeant Major that. It was kind of like their first name to me. And he's like, wait, you had Sergeant Majors buying you beers? I'm like, yeah, why? Is that a big deal? He's like, yes, that's a very big
Oh,
deal.
that is so awesome.
So he thought it was
Well,
pretty funny when I married one.
that is awesome. Well, those guys, they called, when I was at TQ Alticatum, we had the
Hmm.
frogs. And
Hmm.
so we called it the lily pad. Did you ever hear that term?
No, I didn't. Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, the frogs would come in, they would land, and then they would
Hmm.
taxi over to the lily pad. And so all the 46s were out there, and I used to take cigars, and I would get all these cigars sent to me over in Iraq, and I would go over and give them to the Cobra guys, UE guys,
Hmm.
46 guys. And then I would jump on, we had round robins at night, and
Hmm.
they would take off and they'd go fly to all the different bases, and you'd move personnel and sick and
Hmm.
wounded or whatever. You would just move people around. Coming off leave, you catch a flight and get on there and go to your base. So one night I get on this flight to go around, and I literally froze. I was frozen. By the end, I was going around to see all the docks. I would see all the Navy
Hmm.
corpsmen, and I gave them all cigars, and I gave them my card, and this is who I am, and I'm the assistant air boss at Alticatum. Listen, here's what I want you to do. Right, hour of life is the big deal.
Hmm.
That first hour, golden
Hmm.
hour.
Yep.
I go, I'm asking you to do something that's not really kosher. When you got a guy calling in the 9 line up to Al Assad, I want you to phone me, give me the same 9 line. They're going to approve it. I mean, they're going
Hmm.
to they're going to approve it, because it's usually an ambush or whatever. But give
Mhm.
me the 9 line so I can get a helicopter and give them the heads up and the coordinates. So when my 9 line officially came across on the secret server, um, I could officially call the guys. Well, they were already in the air, sort of hitting that direction. They were
Mhm.
doing an FCF around the field, and
Mhm.
then I get on the radio. I'm like, "Hey, it's approved," and they get over there. So the guy's like, I get called out one day, and this colonel calls me up and goes, "Hey, Major Bell, explain to me how they got hit at say 1900, 1905. The 9 line was approved and sent to you. Helicopters launched at 1906 and patient retrieved at 1908 and back to the base at 1920.
Mhm.
Explain to me this. Do they fly faster through the air at Alticatum than they do up at Al Assad?" And I'm like,
Mhm.
"Sir, all I got to say is I think they were on an FCF that day. They were out testing something." "Really?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Well, how about this other one?" "Yes, sir. I think that was an FCF too." "And how about this one?" "Oh, that was definitely an FCF, functional check flight." And then the
Mhm.
guy's like, "You better not be launching helicopters without my authority." And I go, "Sir, I would never do that. But let me ask you something. If your son was laying in the streets, wounded, wouldn't you want the most expeditious, I mean, if it's
Mhm.
still hot and we're waiting for your approval, the guys aren't going to land. They're going to be out doing a circle somewhere else. But
Mhm.
wouldn't you want your son picked up as fast as you could?" And the guy said, "Okay, okay. Don't be launching helicopters without my authority." I'm like, "I got you, sir. No problem." And
Yep.
it was kind of like this unwritten rule. We would spool the guys up, and they could at least get out there and get the helicopters going, get in the air, and then head the right direction.
Mhm.
But your Purple Fox guys, if they're listening right now, um, you know, I remember going through the Korean War at the Marine Corps Museum. I'm
Mhm.
not I'm not endorsing this, but I thought, God, that'd be really neat if somebody put "give a shit," spray painted inside that helicopter on the side wall as you walk through. That'd be kind of funny. It would drive those
Yep.
guys nuts. You ought to make little
Mhm.
stickers up. They can put little flash stickers on there.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Well, I got a couple things here,
Okay.
and hold on one. I want to put this. I got to put this up, but you got a couple. You definitely have some fans here. Is you've got we start off with Jeff Moses. So
Oh, yeah.
hippie. Yep.
Mhm.
And there you go.
Yep. Like
Favorite
you've
sergeant major right there. Hey, is he around? You have to get him. You have to get him because there are a couple people that are talking about him. So
He's in
if
the
he's
other
in
room.
there,
Rick, come in here.
yeah, yell
Look,
for
he'll
him.
be in a sec. Yeah, as
Yeah.
you said before, it's a very small world in the military. A lot of times I'll be looking on Facebook or something. I'm like, is this my Marine or your Marine? Is it my fox or your fox? Oh,
Oh,
there's
Larry.
Larry.
Yep, Larry says hi.
Yep.
Um, yeah, Jeff wrote a longer one. Best Sergeant Major's 252 had. That is so
Yep.
cool that he was swinging with the wing. And Alan Steiner says, "Tell Stephanie I said hi. Her
There you
husband
go.
Rick was my sergeant major." So there,
Yep.
when you got all these people coming up about what a great sergeant major, he was a great sergeant major. And of course, this fine lady right here,
There he is. And my puppy.
Tony.
Ah,
Hey,
that's my
how
parents.
you doing, Sergeant Major? What's going on,
Look, there's my mom. That's my mom and dad.
Tony?
Yep.
It's awesome. Oh
Yeah,
God.
I knew, back when I first started the journey, I kind of went with a couple civilians to events, and they never understood what was going on. And so, like I said, when I met Rick, it was like, okay, Sergeant Major, I can't help his career. He doesn't think I know the commandant. Okay, I'm good to go.
Well, Larry pointed out. Tell the story. So when you guys came down to Skyball,
Mhm.
um, we did the portrait ceremony
Mhm.
with you, which is
Mhm.
it's funny because Blake went to high school with my wife,
Oh,
and
okay.
that's how I got to know all those Lisa and them, Phil.
Mhm.
So, um, at his funeral. That was the first funeral I went to when I got home. I got home in February of '06,
Mhm.
and I think Blake died in March or April. But tell about that. I mean, we had we had the portrait ceremony that Phil does,
Mhm.
and you were able to get your dad's portrait and
Mhm.
one for Jennifer as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, the Skyball, that was one of the most amazing events I've ever been to. American Airlines, talk about treating people right. Absolutely. They flew Rick and I in from North Carolina. They flew
Mhm,
in my uncle and my aunt from Washington State. Then they
mhm,
flew in, of course, Jen's family, Linda and Tony. And the first portrait ceremony, the smaller version of it, when we were there, it had, I think, 16 or 18 Medal of Honor recipients.
mhm. Yeah,
And so they award us this portrait, and then my uncle and I are standing there, and all of these Medal of Honor recipients are walking by, shaking my uncle's hand, telling him thank you. And I think that was one of the most profound moments of his life. I mean, he told me so later because he said, I grew up even after meeting you thinking that everyone forgot about Gary. And here I've got Medal of Honor recipients thanking me for my sacrifice. I mean, he was
yeah.
just overwhelmed. And then the VIP treatment, the concert with Clint Black and being treated like a VIP, getting in all the tents and
Gary
meeting
Sinise doing
people,
the
and then
voiceover
Gary
for the
Sinise, that was
mm,
unbelievable. Telling our story. I mean, I still have that on my Facebook page. I mean, no better
yeah,
person to tell our story. And I think you've heard the story, but he does hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, for American Airlines of these
right.
videos. They
Mhm,
just pop him in a booth, and he just reads what's in front of him, goes on to the next one, on and on. And about halfway through telling the story of my story and Jen's story and the flag that tied it together, he stopped and looked up at the person and said, "Is this an actual real story?" And they said, "Yeah, this really happened." And he was so struck by that several years later, Jen's family saw him and mentioned it, and he remembered. And a few years later, I saw him and mentioned it, and he still remembered it.
yeah,
I mean, he knew the story. It wasn't like he was just nodding and agreeing, like he's a
yeah,
celebrity and met so many people. He was like the flag, the helicopter, and the flag, and it was like,
yeah.
yep. So,
Well, it's
yeah,
a story you can't forget. I mean, that
no,
the dates and the whole 9 yards, it's just I could
yeah,
see
you
Gary
can't make
doing
it
that
up.
too. Yeah, you can't make that up. That
Mhm,
Yeah, I'm gonna give a plug, Randy, Stillinger and, Jim Palmersheim and all the, Tony Russell and all the people that, Fort Worth Air Power Council and all the folks that got together, there are just so many, Roman Sid and
mhm,
Wanda and all of our friends. We were all volunteers. That's what made that special.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
as a Marine reservist, I would call all the squadrons, and I would get the young enlisted kids, Navy and the Army and the Air Force Marines, and they would escort those Medal of Honor recipients for almost 5 days. And
mhm,
then all of you guys that came in, we
mhm,
had VIP drivers like Glenn Williams. He's probably watching this right now. He's American, and he would drive people around. You guys were VIPs and the hotels, and that is something that we'll probably never see again. Thanks to the Chinese, thanks to the COVID. Um,
yeah,
I'm going to say it. Thanks to COVID,
mhm,
it has shut down. We had it canceled last year, and I am pretty sure that it's not going to happen this year. And if it does, it'll be different. But
right,
yeah, I sure miss that. I'm very proud of my company and a lot of the things that we do for veterans and veterans affairs initiatives. And
mhm,
that meeting you guys through that was probably the best 12 years of my life. But in my mind, that sticks out. That Skyball, it was 9, I think Skyball 9,
mhm,
and that one really sticks out in my mind because of that dual portrait
yeah,
ceremony. Yeah.
yeah. And then my husband and then Sean Colleen, they were the honor guards and stood
Yes.
up there. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was very, very special.
And then getting to see Sean again. Sean and I
Mhm,
were young captains, and
mhm,
we used to go run hash together. Have you ever heard of that? Hash
mm-mm,
runs. So
mm-mm.
it's a Brit thing. You go out.
Okay.
It's a drinking club with a running problem, or what do they say? A running club with a drinking problem. But you go out and you would run like 5 or 6 miles through people's
Mhm,
backyards and whatnot, chasing the hares. And then when you got to the end, It had just tons and tons of tubs of beer, and you'd sit and drink beer and sing Irish drinking songs and have fun. And if somebody showed up, one of your guests showed up, and they wore brand new tennis shoes, because you'd tell they're new.
Mhm.
They had to drink the beer out of the shoe. Oh, it was miserable.
Mhm.
But
It
you
sounds like
know,
Marines.
yeah. Sean
Mhm.
and I knew each other from back in the day, and it was so funny seeing him. And it was just like yesterday,
Yeah.
because you spend a year together, and it's just like yesterday. And then the antics over in Iraq, I'm telling tall tales now, but I got a phone call. Hey, Taco, man, could you come to our tent? They just done the Rip Toa,
Mhm.
and he goes, there is something dead underneath the floor of this tent, and I
Mhm.
need your pool. The engineers and stuff. Could you get them come tear the floor up and find this dead fox animal, whatever the hell it is? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I go over there, and I walk in, and you got to imagine these big GP tents. It's 130 degrees, 135 degrees. And you walk in, and the stench, I'm going, it's not like bad socks. It just smelled horrible. And I'm going,
Mhm.
holy crap. And he goes, see what we're dealing with? I'm like, yeah, I got you, man. I got you. So I'm making phone calls, and I'm getting the engineers to go over there and rip the flooring up. But now they got to move everything around.
Mhm.
Well, he's laying on his rack, and he looks up, and there's a big beam going across the top of the tent. And what those jerks had done was taken some cartons of milk and shimmied up that wooden pole
Oh.
and opened the carton of milk and stuck it up right up on the top of
Oh.
the post. So there was like two or three of these things up there, and the heat from the sun on top of that tent
Ew.
permeated, and oh, the smell was
Ugh.
horrendous. But the worst part was the guy got up there when he was shimmying up, the thing fell, and one of them hit him. So he had curdled milk stinks all over him, all over his rack. But they caught the culprits. But the guys had left a little message. So I love Marines. I love how they mess with one another and have a little fun. We're the best, and all that.
Mhm.
But Purple
Yep.
Foxes definitely give a shit. So very
That's
cool.
for sure.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Stephanie, for hanging out with us. It's going on an hour, and I tell you, like they say on the radio, hang on the line. We'll catch up here in a minute, but I want to
Okay.
thank you personally from the bottom of my heart coming out here. And if you folks want, this is on Amazon, isn't it?
Mhm.
Can you get
Mhm.
this on Amazon?
Yep.
So, do you have the audio version? Are you doing the audio yet?
Haven't done the audio yet. Mm-mm.
Well, you need to do the audio. You have a great voice. You would be
Oh,
perfect
thank
for it.
you.
So if you guys have a chance, make sure you buy Stephanie's book, and certainly do appreciate you all hanging out with us tonight. Stephanie, God bless you. You have fun, and I'll just talk to you in a few minutes, okay?
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right, hang on. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
Hey guys, thanks again. Another edition of Tall Tales with Taco. I really do appreciate you hanging in there, and all the folks that were watching. I love your comments. I'm sorry I can't answer everything while we're sitting there talking, but I really do appreciate you being here. Until next Tuesday, adios, hasta luego, auf Wiedersehen, tschüss, shesheni, au revoir, domo arigato gozaimasu, tano shinde kudasai, ciao, rivedici, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Let's see if we can have a little fun here. I think John Stanbury said he liked the darker one, so I'm going to end with the darker one. If you guys stand by, here we go.